Have you noticed how often you explain yourself? I'm sorry, I can't because I only said that because I didn't mean it that way. At first, it feels polite, it feels considerate, like you're making sure no one misunderstands you. But look deeper. Every extra word, every long explanation is a quiet way of asking for permission to exist. And here's the hard truth. Carl Jung believed this isn't just a social habit, it's a wound born when your feelings were dismissed, when your truth was questioned, when you learned as a child that what you feel only matters if others approve. So now, as an adult, you keep justifying, not because you want to, but because a part of you fears, if I don't explain, they'll reject me. But what if that fear is lying to you? What if the moment you stop explaining yourself is the moment everything begins to change? Because silence, real silence, grounded silence, isn't weakness, it's authority. And in this video, we'll uncover Jung's insights on why we over-explain, how this silent habit betrays the self, and what happens when you finally break free. Stay with me, because by the end of this journey, you may never look at an apology, a justification, or your own silence the same way again. Think back for a moment. Can you remember the first time someone told you, "Don't be so dramatic. Stop crying, it's nothing"? Why are you so sensitive? For a child, those words cut deeper than we realize, because a child doesn't just hear the correction. They hear a message about their very existence. My feelings are wrong. My truth doesn't matter unless someone else approves it. That message plants a seed, and over time that seed grows into something subtle but powerful, the compulsion to explain yourself. When you're young, you don't have power. You rely on your parents, your teachers, the adults around you. If they invalidate your feelings, you adapt. You learn to justify everything you feel. I'm not angry, I'm just tired. I'm not sad, I'm just having a bad day. I didn't mean to be selfish, And slowly you start to believe the only way to survive is to make sure others understand you, or at least accept the excuse you give. Jung would call this the birth of the invisible prison. A prison built not of walls and bars, but of explanations, justifications, and endless words that try to buy permission to exist. Here's the tragedy. That child grows up, but the prison doesn't disappear. As an adult, you may not even notice it. At work, you explain why your email was late. With friends, you explain why you couldn't make it. In relationships, you explain why you're quiet, why you're upset, why you need space, and none of it sounds wrong. In fact, people might call you thoughtful, polite, easy to get along with. But inside, something's happening. Every time you justify yourself, you're telling your own soul, I can't stand on my truth alone. I need them to agree with it first. That is the essence of the invisible prison. Carl Jung warned about this pattern. He saw it as more than a habit. He saw it as a psychic wound. Because what looks like kindness, what looks like empathy, is often rooted in fear, the fear of being abandoned, rejected, or unseen. So you explain to protect yourself. You explain to keep the peace. You explain to hold on to belonging. But what you lose in the process is something much greater, your internal authority. Think of authority as gravity. When you own your truth, your energy pulls inward, toward your center. You live from the inside out. But when you keep explaining, your gravity flips. Your energy is scattered outward. Your worth depends on their reaction, their approval, their understanding. Instead of being the author of your life, you become an actor in their play. Instead of walking your own path, you walk in circles, rehearsing the same justifications again and again. This is why Jung said that compulsive self-explanation is not harmless, it's submission. Every explanation is like bowing your head, handing over your power, and whispering, please, allow me to exist. Let's pause here, because this is where many people protest. But isn't explaining just being polite? Isn't it good to help others understand? Yes, when it's a choice. But what we're talking about here is not a free choice. It's a compulsion. It's when you can't stop yourself. It's when silence feels unbearable, when you feel guilty just saying no, when you need to add 3 reasons to justify a simple decision. That's not kindness. That's the prison. And prisons always cost you something. The cost is subtle at first, a little doubt in your voice, a little hesitation before you answer, But over time, the cost grows. You lose confidence in your feelings. You second-guess every decision. You trust others' opinions more than your own. Until one day, you look in the mirror and you don't even know if the person staring back at you is living for themselves or just performing to keep everyone else comfortable. Jung saw this cycle play out in countless lives. He believed that until you confront it, you remain a reflection of others' expectations, not the reality of who you truly are. And that's why he called it a central obstacle on the path of individuation. Because as long as you keep explaining yourself, you can never be whole. So let me ask you, when was the last time you gave an explanation you didn't really need to give? Was it to a coworker, to a friend, to a family member, or maybe even to yourself? That moment, right there, was the prison speaking. And the first step toward freedom is simply to notice it, to see the bars for what they are, because only then can you begin the journey of walking out.
Have you ever noticed? Sometimes you explain things not because someone asked, but because your mask answered for you. Carl Jung called this mask the persona. It's the version of you that the world finds easiest to accept. It's the smile at work, the polite tone in family dinners, the quick "I'm fine" when you're anything but fine. The persona isn't evil, it's necessary. Without it, we couldn't function in society. But here's the danger: when the mask becomes louder than the self, it never stops talking. It never stops justifying. And that's when the mask begins to live your life for you. Think about it. How many times have you explained yourself just to keep your mask intact? At work, I stayed late last night. That's why I'm quiet today. With friends, I didn't text back right away. I was just busy. In relationships, I'm not upset, I just didn't sleep well. Do you see it? Each explanation isn't about truth. It's about maintaining the image, protecting the mask, keeping the persona polished. Here's the mini hook. When the persona talks too much, the soul whispers less and less. The more you rely on the mask, the more you start believing it. You confuse performance with reality. You confuse approval with connection. You confuse explaining with being understood. And slowly, you forget what your own unfiltered truth even sounds like. Jung warned us about this. He said the persona is like clothing. You put it on to go outside. It protects you from the weather of the world. But if you never take it off, if you sleep in it, eat in it, live in it, the fabric begins to suffocate you. And that suffocation feels like exhaustion. Why? Because every explanation you give is like tightening the mask a little more. Your smile strains, your voice trembles, your soul grows tired.
Here's a scene you may know too well. Imagine you're at work. Your boss asks, "Can you stay an extra hour?" You want to say no, you need to say no, but instead your mask jumps in. "Well, I do have something later, but I think I can rearrange it." The truth? You're exhausted. But the mask doesn't allow exhaustion. The mask only allows approval. So you explain, justify, reshape yourself, all to keep the persona shining. And it doesn't stop at work. At a family gathering, someone asks why you're quiet. The mask responds, "Oh, I'm just tired." Even when the truth is deeper. With a friend, you cancel plans because you're drained. The mask adds 3 excuses instead of simply saying, "I need rest." Everywhere you go, the persona talks for you. It fills the silence. It patches over your truth. It keeps explaining. But here's the dark side. The persona is never satisfied. The more you explain, the more it demands. And over time, you begin to mistake the mask for who you really are. That's why so many people feel lost. Not because they don't have an identity, but because their mask has spoken for them for so long that the real voice inside feels faint, almost forgotten. Jung put it this way: the persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself and others think one is. Read that again. The persona is not you, but it's what you and everyone around you start believing you are. So when you keep explaining yourself, you're not actually defending your truth, you're defending your mask. This is why explanations feel endless, because the persona is endless. It can never relax. It can never simply be. It always needs polishing, defending, protecting. And that's the trap. You spend years, decades even, building arguments for a self that doesn't even exist. Let me give you the hardest truth. Every time you justify yourself, you are silently telling your soul, "Wait." You don't get to speak yet. The mask has the microphone, and the soul waits. and waits, until one day you realize you've lived more years as a character than as yourself. But here's the turning point. When you begin to notice the mask, you also begin to notice the silence underneath it, the quiet space where your true self waits. And if you listen, if you dare to stop explaining, you may hear that voice rise again. Not polished, not perfect, not needing approval, just true. So ask yourself this: when you explain, is it really you speaking? Or is it your persona fighting to stay alive? Because the mask may protect you, but it also keeps you from breathing. And Jung's message is clear. You cannot individuate, you cannot become whole, as long as the mask keeps talking for you. So far, we've looked at the invisible prison, and we've looked at the mask, the persona. But now we need to go deeper. Because behind every explanation, behind every carefully chosen reason, there's something else at work, something Jung called the shadow. Here's the mini-hook. What if you're not just explaining your choices, you're hiding your fears? The shadow is everything you've pushed away. The anger you were told was ugly, the sadness you were told was weakness, the needs you were told were selfish, the fear you were told was silly. All of it, stuffed into the dark basement of the psyche. Unseen, unspoken, unwelcome. But here's the paradox. The more you try to hide it, the more it shapes your life. Think of it like this. A visitor comes to your home. They sit in your living room. You put on your mask, your polite persona. You offer coffee, you smile, you explain. But deep inside, something starts to stir. A sudden irritation, a tightness in your chest, a strange urge to escape. You can't explain why. You just feel uncomfortable. That discomfort? That's the shadow knocking. When you explain yourself over and over, you're not just trying to be understood. You're trying to keep the shadow hidden. You're trying to cover up the part of you that you're afraid they'll see. The anger, the sadness, the shame, the vulnerability. So you pile on explanations, like blankets over a restless animal. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It leaks out, in your tone, in your body language, in your eyes. And people feel it, even if they can't name it. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This is why so many relationships feel heavy. It's not the explanation itself, it's the shadow energy behind it. When you say, I didn't mean to upset you, what you're really saying is, please don't see my anger. When you say, I'm not sad, I'm just tired, what you're really saying is, please don't see my grief. When you say, I'm fine, I just overreact sometimes, what you're really saying is, please don't see my fear. The explanation isn't about clarity, it's about control. Control over what parts of you are allowed into the light. But here's the truth Jung discovered. The shadow isn't only darkness, it also holds your hidden power. That anger you explain away, it contains your strength. That sadness you dismiss, it contains your depth. That fear you cover, it contains your intuition. Every time you explain yourself to hide the shadow, you bury not just your wounds, you bury your gifts. So let me ask you this. What part of yourself do you always try to explain away? Do you downplay your anger? Do you mask your sensitivity? Do you rationalize your boundaries? That's your shadow speaking. And every explanation is another attempt to push it back underground. But here's the catch. The shadow doesn't stay underground forever. It comes out sideways, through passive aggression, through sudden explosions, through emotional exhaustion. And the longer you deny it, the louder it gets. This is why Jung insisted that facing the shadow is not optional. It's essential. Because until you face it, you'll keep explaining yourself forever. Not because people need answers, but because you're terrified that if you stop talking, they might see the truth. Imagine this. Instead of explaining away your sadness, you simply said, yes, I'm sad. Instead of justifying your anger, you simply said, yes, I'm angry. Instead of covering your fear, you simply said, yes, I'm afraid. That's not weakness, that's courage, that's integration. It's the moment you stop hiding the shadow and you begin to reclaim the power inside it. So here's the real shift. Every explanation you give isn't just a sentence, it's a strategy to keep your shadow unseen. But the moment you stop explaining, you give the shadow space to breathe. You bring it out of hiding. And in doing so, you begin the work of becoming whole. Because the shadow isn't your enemy. It's the part of you that's been waiting the longest to be welcomed home. And the moment you face it, the need to explain yourself begins to dissolve. Not because you're forcing silence, but because you finally have nothing to hide. Every choice has a cost, and the cost of constant explanation is heavier than most people realize. On the surface, it looks harmless. You explain to keep the peace. You justify to avoid conflict. You give reasons to appear considerate. But beneath the surface, something devastating is happening. You are betraying yourself. Here's the mini hook. Every unnecessary explanation is a small act of self-abandonment. Think about it. When you say yes but mean no, you abandon your boundary. When you say, "I'm not angry, I'm just tired," you abandon your truth. When you laugh at a joke you don't find funny just to fit in, you abandon your authenticity. Each little act feels small, insignificant, but they pile up, and over time they fracture your sense of self. Jung warned that this fracture, this distance between the ego and the self, is the root of many modern neuroses. The ego becomes a servant, not to your wholeness, but to external approval. It reshapes itself again and again, like wet clay molded by other people's hands. The result? Exhaustion, anxiety, a quiet emptiness you can't shake. Because the more you betray yourself, the less solid you feel inside. Let's put this into real life. At work, you explain why you didn't volunteer. At home, you explain why you need a night alone. With friends, you explain why you can't always be available. Each time, the explanation may smooth things over. But what happens inside you? A little voice whispers, "They only accept me because I explained myself, not because of who I really am." That voice is the sound of fragmentation, the sound of your inner foundation cracking. Here's the cruel irony. Society often rewards this behavior. The employee who never pushes back, the friend who always justifies themselves, the partner who bends to keep harmony. People call them easy, considerate, good. But inside, those same people are quietly falling apart, because false harmony always comes at the cost of inner chaos. And Jung saw this again and again in his patients. He noticed the people who over-explained often carried a heavy fatigue, not just physical tiredness, but a spiritual exhaustion. Why? Because it takes enormous energy to live as fragments, to maintain the mask, to suppress the shadow, to betray yourself day after day and still keep smiling. Here's the deeper cost. When you betray yourself enough times, you lose trust in yourself. You stop believing your feelings. You second-guess every decision. You wonder, am I too sensitive? Am I too selfish? Am I wrong for wanting this? That doubt is poison. It corrodes confidence. It keeps you small. It convinces you that you need explanations just to take up space. But let's be clear, this isn't just psychology, it's spiritual. Because every soul has one sacred task, to live in alignment with itself. And every time you explain away your truth, you step further from that task. You drift from wholeness. You become, in Jung's words, a mask, not a man. So ask yourself honestly, how much of your exhaustion comes from what you're doing, and how much comes from what you're betraying? Because the cost of explanation isn't just lost time, it's lost self. But here's the good news. The very moment you see the cost clearly, you gain the power to stop paying it, to choose alignment over approval, to choose truth over performance, to choose yourself, again and again, until the fragments begin to heal. There comes a moment, after years of explaining, justifying, defending, you stop. And in that pause, everything flips. What used to feel like weakness, your silence, suddenly becomes strength. Here's the hook. When you stop explaining, you stop asking for permission to exist. That's the axis shift Carl Jung spoke of. The psyche, once bent outward toward approval, turns back inward, toward its true center. This is not arrogance. This is alignment. Think about the last time you said no without adding 3 paragraphs of explanation. At first it felt awkward, maybe even guilty. But then, didn't you also feel a strange surge of power, a grounding, as if, for once, you were standing on your own feet? That's authoritative silence. It's not passive, it's not avoidance, it's presence. Jung understood silence as more than the absence of words. He called it a form of psychic authority. Because silence sends a message: I don't need to convince you. I don't need to be understood. What I know inside is enough. That stance is rare, and because it's rare, it carries weight. Of course, silence unsettles people, especially those who relied on your explanations. Manipulators lose their grip. Why? Because manipulation needs reaction. It feeds on your fear of being misunderstood. But when you don't react, when you don't justify, their entire game collapses. Your silence becomes a wall they can't climb. But silence does more than end manipulation. It resets relationships. Friends, partners, even co-workers. Some will fall away, not because you failed them, but because your silence exposed the imbalance. Others, the ones who value truth over control, will lean in closer. They'll respect the space you hold, because they feel something different in you, something solid. This is the flip of the axis. Before, your center of gravity lived outside you, in their approval, their understanding, their acceptance. Now the center returns home, to the self, to the place Jung described as the wholeness of being. From this place, your words change. You no longer speak to persuade, you speak to express. It's the difference between pleading, "Please see me," and declaring, "This is me." Here's the paradox: the less you explain, the more people listen. Why? Because integrity has weight, silence has density, it radiates. You don't need to argue for respect. You embody it, and the world responds. But let's be honest, this silence doesn't come easy. The old reflex to explain will claw at you. It will whisper, "Say something," soften the blow, convince them you're still good. That's the old axis pulling you back. And this is where the real work begins. Holding the silence even when it shakes you, staying rooted even when you feel exposed. Because every time you hold silence, you strengthen your core. Every time you resist the urge to explain, you reclaim a piece of yourself. Authoritative silence is not coldness, it's not cutting people off. It's the choice to no longer put your soul on trial, to let your yes and your no stand on their own. This silence is the soil where individuation grows. It's where the fragmented pieces start to come together. It's where you move from borrowed authority to true authority. So the next time you feel the urge to justify, pause, breathe, say nothing, and notice how the axis shifts inside you. Notice how, in that silence, you feel whole, because silence, grounded in self, isn't empty, it's full, full of presence, full of power, full of you. At the heart of Carl Jung's psychology lies one of his most powerful ideas: individuation. It's a big word, but its meaning is simple. It's the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are, not who others told you to be, not the version of you that fits neatly into expectations, but the whole you, light and shadow, strength and wound, silence and voice. Here's the key. The journey of individuation always demands a shift, from living for approval to living from inner authority. And that shift only begins the moment you stop explaining yourself. Think about it. As long as your existence depends on other people's approval, you're a character in their play. You wear their costumes, you deliver their lines, and your worth rises and falls with their applause. That's not life, that's performance. Jung saw this dependency as one of the greatest obstacles to individuation. Because if you are always bending outward, you never discover the core that's already within you. So what does individuation look like in practice? It begins in silence. The kind of silence we explored in the last chapter, a silence rooted in authority, not in fear. Each time you resist the urge to explain, you carve out space for your true self to breathe. Each time you let your no stand without justification, you strengthen the roots of your inner authority. And over time, this silence begins to transform you. At first, it feels lonely. When you stop explaining, some people pull away. They were never there for your truth. They were there for your compliance. But slowly, a deeper circle begins to form. People who don't need you to explain, who can sit with your silence, who trust your choices without demanding proof. These are the people your true self attracts, because individuation has a magnetism. It pulls in what resonates and lets fall away what no longer belongs. But individuation isn't just about relationships. It's about your own inner compass. When you're still stuck in approval, every decision feels shaky. Will they be upset? Will they understand? Will they still accept me? But once you root yourself in inner authority, the questions shift. Does this align with my truth? Does this strengthen my wholeness? Does this honor my soul? And that shift changes everything. Because now, life isn't something you perform for others. It's something you live for yourself. Here's the paradox Jung pointed out. The more you seek approval, the less respect you receive. But the moment you stand firm in inner authority, the world begins to treat you differently. Not because you demanded respect, but because respect flows naturally from coherence. When your inner world and outer actions align, people sense it. They may not always like it, but they cannot ignore it. That's the quiet power of individuation. But let's not romanticize it. This journey isn't easy. Individuation means facing the fear of rejection head-on. It means losing roles you've outgrown. It means standing in your truth even when it costs you belonging. Jung often said individuation requires walking through the desert of solitude, a period where you feel stripped, exposed, with no approval to lean on. But that desert is sacred, because only there do you find your own well of authority. When you emerge from that desert, you carry something no approval can give you: self-trust. You don't just believe you're enough, you know it. You feel it in your bones, and that knowledge cannot be taken away. That's inner authority. That's individuation. So remember this. Every time you stop explaining, you are not being cold. You are not being rude. You are stepping onto the path of individuation. A path where your worth is not rented from others. It's owned by you. Where silence is not emptiness. It's power. Where your life is no longer a performance. It's finally your own. People respect what you refuse to negotiate. When you stop explaining yourself, something subtle yet undeniable begins to happen. It's as if your very presence changes the air around you. Carl Jung believed that the psyche carries energy, and that energy radiates outward like a field. He called it presence, alignment, integrity. And here's the truth. The moment you no longer put your soul on trial, the world feels it. It reorganizes itself around you. Think about stone. Stone doesn't move to please the waves. The tide crashes, foams, then retreats. But the stone remains, steady, grounded, unchanged. That's what integrity feels like. You become immovable in your truth. You don't argue, you don't explain, you don't negotiate what is sacred inside you. And because you hold that line, the world begins to respond differently. First, the weak ties break. Relationships built on imbalance, where you carried the weight of justifying yourself, begin to collapse. At first, this feels like loss. People drift away. Friends who needed you to bend, partners who thrived on your compliance, colleagues who relied on your constant explanations, they fall out of orbit. But this is not failure, it's realignment. Like a magnet that shifts its poles, your integrity field pushes out what no longer resonates. Then, something new happens. Stronger ties form. People who value respect, truth, and authenticity step closer. They don't need you to explain. They don't demand a performance. They can sit with your silence and still trust your essence. These are the connections forged in integrity. They appear not because you chased them, but because your new field drew them in. Jung understood this as individuation in action. When you center yourself in inner authority, you emit a different frequency, one of quiet strength, one of coherence, one that says without words, I know who I am. I do not need permission, and people sense it. Some resist it, but others respect it deeply, because integrity carries weight, and weight commands respect. Imagine the dawn. It doesn't explain itself to the night. It doesn't argue for its right to rise. It simply appears, bright, undeniable, whole. That's what it means to live in your integrity field, to be steady like stone and radiant like dawn, not begging to be understood, not negotiating your truth, just present. And that presence alone reshapes everything around you. So remember, people don't truly respect explanations. They respect what you refuse to negotiate. When you stand rooted in silence, when you stop justifying your existence, your world reorganizes. False ties dissolve, true connections emerge, and you finally stand as both the stone and the dawn, unmoved, unapologetic, undeniably yourself.
At the end of this journey, one truth stands clear. Explaining yourself was never the path to freedom. It was the cage. Every time you bent your words to please, every time you dressed your feelings in justifications, you chipped away at your wholeness. But the moment you stopped, the moment you held your silence with authority, something extraordinary began to happen. The world shifted, respect appeared, and your soul began to breathe again. Carl Jung reminded us that individuation, the becoming of your true self, is not about perfection, it's about courage. The courage to walk without permission, the courage to hold boundaries without guilt, the courage to say, "This is me," and that is enough. That courage is not loud, it does not need applause, it is quiet, steady, undeniable, like stone against the tide, like dawn against the night. So here is the call. Will you keep explaining, begging for approval, living as a character in someone else's play? Or will you step into silence, stand in your integrity, and claim the life that has always been yours? Because the world doesn't need another performance. It needs your wholeness. It needs your truth. It needs you, unapologetic, unedited, whole. If this message spoke to you, don't let it end here. Hit the like button so others can find it. Subscribe for more deep dives into Jung's wisdom. And in the comments, tell me, what is the one explanation you're ready to stop giving? Because the moment you share it, you take your first step into freedom. Together, let's practice the courage to be whole.